Welcome everybody to this month's Transboundary Groundwater Resilience TGR seminar series. A few announcements. The Transboundary Groundwater Resilience Network of Networks is a project funded by the National Science Foundation's ExcelNet program to connect US and international networks of water, data, social, and systems science to identify key data and leverage points to catalyze transformative change for transboundary groundwater systems. If you haven't already, please join our mailing list, our Slack channel, and look at our website for volunteer opportunities. And please fill out our new survey to be listed as a member of the TGR NON Network of Networks. And Jeanette is putting the links in the chat. Today, we would like to welcome Frédéric Guarino, who, after more than 15 years in technology innovation and marketing strategy, pivoted to academia and is now a lecturer at the University of Sherbrooke at the Peace Innovation Institute in The Hague and the Peace Innovation Lab at Stanford. Frédéric's work is at the intersection of technology, AI, water geopolitics, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He is a journalist by training and has lived and worked in the US, France, Switzerland, Japan, and Canada. He is co-organizing the virtual online green zone of COP15 biodiversity, which takes place in Montreal. And he will be presenting about that today. Take it away, Frédéric.
All right, thanks everybody. And we're going to do a very interactive session because I like them that way. Plus, I have COVID. Symptoms are manageable, but you can hear I have a bit of a cold. So thank you to the Transboundary Groundwater Resilience Project for this opportunity to talk about COP15 and what we're setting out to do to connect action-oriented organizations on the ground all over the world. That's why we're going to talk about it. We're doing this as a virtual green zone. We're kind of mimicking what's happening with the COP15 negotiations themselves. So hopefully you're seeing my second slide. So the COP15 was supposed to be in Kunming, China. For self-evident reasons, COVID-related, it was decided to repatriate some of it to Montreal and to also keep the negotiations open virtually. The conference is actually 3 conferences and 3 parallel negotiations at the same time. It's the 15th negotiation of the parties for the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity. It's the 10th on biosafety and the 4th on benefit sharing. So let's go back and look at what is the Convention for Biodiversity. It is an offshoot of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. It actually started prior. It was signed by 150 governments then, and I think we're up to 190, 192. So basically every country in the world has signed it. And it's all about sustainable development. It is conceived as a practical tool. That's why it's all about sharing practical ways to massify solutions. And it recognizes that biodiversity is more than just plants, animals, and so forth. It's about people and our needs for food, medicine, fresh air and water, shelter, and a clean and healthy environment in which to live. So water is a key element to it, evidently. It is recognized as a global asset of value to us and to future generations. So there's an action agenda that, and I'll share these links with you, that you can look at. And what's really interesting is where sometimes COP27, and please chime in the chat, can feel a little removed from the day-to-day. What I found is that COP15 and the Convention for Biodiversity really looks at on-the-ground solutions, on-the-ground organizations, and tries to support them as much as possible. Speaking of water, water-related disasters, as we know, have accounted for 90% of the most disastrous events since 1990. They affect billions of people, and they're causing an increasing amount of damages. That's why we need to get everyone on board to enhance water availability. Nature-based solutions is really the number one action that they're all trying to massify. And it's a lot about, you can see at the bottom there, wetlands and how they function as natural sponges. This is something we've forgotten in North America, and the Delta in the Mississippi is a testament to that. So is the Florida wetlands. They've devised this tool to translate all of these international frameworks into, again, action mode. And this is an instrument to integrate sustainability and resilience into infrastructure projects. Again, I'll share this with you. This is just to give you a bit of a background on the negotiations. I'm going to now go and talk a little bit about water geopolitics and how they're affecting our world. The Himalayan glaciers melting is going to create a billion-person mass problem in a very short while. We've already started to see the beginnings of it. 600 million Indians are already under higher extreme water stress. The fact that climate change is forcing the glaciers to melt, we don't have a lot of backup solutions to provide water to these billions of people, and it looks like the focus is a little bit absent. So the Green Zone is all about advocacy, about NGOs, pressuring governments to focus attention on these issues, and that's what we're setting out to do. In Iran, there has been for a very long time a huge water insecurity. A lot of the backdrop to what's happening right now is in part due, at least outside of the large cities, to formidable water insecurity, and you've had water riots for the past couple of years. This again is not necessarily restituted in the media coverage. Syria, the conflict was in part launched due to water insecurity, and now, after 10 years of war, they're in a situation, according to the Red Cross, where they have 40% less drinking water. So we see a lot of this water stress all over the world. We've got droughts in the Netherlands. We've got the Arctic acidifying. We've got the Mississippi at levels that are near record lows and potentially changing the ability for these barges that are instrumental to farmers. I don't know if people realize that upwards of 50% of fertilizer is actually imported from Russia and Ukraine, and it is put into barges that go up the Mississippi to the plains. All right, so now we're going to talk about the virtual green zone and what we're setting out to do. Now, what is a green zone in most COPs? So this is what the COP27 is defining it as. It is a platform for business, youth, civil and indigenous societies, academia, and all sorts of communities to express themselves and make their voices heard. And you're right, William, it is a problem in Europe. The Rhine in particular has been undergoing the same type of water stress for the past few months. So the green zone typically is a physical place. And because most of the negotiation and the presence for COP15 was going to be virtual, we decided with a number of organizations to get together and create this virtual green zone to showcase a number of on-the-ground initiatives. I'll show you a few. And the purpose of my speaking today is to connect with you and others you might know of who are involved in organizations that are doing work on the ground and that would benefit from connecting with others around the world. This is why we chose a virtual green zone. For the past couple of years, the UN has recognized Indigenous peoples and their methodology to enrich climate action. And this is a very welcome development. Here you see examples of tried and tested practices, native tree plantation, revitalization of traditional technologies connected to agriculture, aquaculture, etc. And the idea is to connect with these communities and their organizations to create a worldwide network. One of these organizations I actually met through a previous talk by TGR. It is Oneganos, run by Dawn Martin-Hill, who's a professor at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. And she's focusing on what she calls co-creation, the facilitation of sharing and integration of Western science and Indigenous and local knowledge. So this is a really interesting development, and I'm speaking and connecting in all sorts of forums to try and surface these organizations that have an interest in connecting with each other. Dawn was at the International Water Association in Copenhagen a few weeks ago, and she mentioned to me that there is this need to further connect organizations, and it's not done enough. So she's more than happy to participate in our initiative to do so. She's looking at these Indigenous water quality tools, ecological knowledge training, mixed methods, etc. As you may or may not know, there's a big water stress in Indigenous communities here in Canada. And there's a lot of work happening on the ground, where there needs to be more and more work. So that's what we're trying to do, is to surface organizations like Oneganos. Here are others that we're looking at. So the Global Greens is co-sponsoring this initiative. The Global Greens is the coordination of the Green parties on a global scale. UNAC, United Nations Association in Canada, is a private charity of people who are working on the ground according to the UN Charter values. Masse Critique is a newly launched NGO looking at how the marketing world needs to be more sustainable. We're working with McGill University's environmental student society. We're going to contact and try to get participation from the David Suzuki Foundation, the Sierra Club, both in Canada and US, potentially the Sunrise Movement. So if you here on this talk know of folks we can connect with at these organizations, specifically the Sierra Club, I'd be more than interested. And as far as Indigenous groups, we're looking at this IWGIA working group, as well as APIB in Brazil. One of the key issues that we're faced with right now is, because of deforestation in the Amazon, we've gone into a situation where The Amazon used to be a net emitter of oxygen and is now a net emitter of CO2. And we're potentially going to be in the same situation with the equatorial forest in Africa around the Congo. Last summer and this summer, they very vocally in the Congo started a process of oil and gas leasing auctions. And they're basically saying to the G7, you promised us all sorts of things in 2015 at the Paris COP, and we still haven't seen the money. We need to develop ourselves. And if we're in a situation where we lose the equatorial forest in Africa, that is a huge carbon sink, especially the peats there. In addition to the forest, it's going to be, for biodiversity, a huge spillover effect. So we're trying to also, with this virtual green zone, sort of heighten the information level on that respect. All right, let's go to questions or comments. I see John. You're considering water issues as an important research and education focus, and you're located on the Ogallala Aquifer. Excellent.
There was a question earlier by William Turner. I don't know if you saw that. Are you
No, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. So whenever you stop on the highway between Manaus and Caracas, there's a constant buzz. It is not pollinating bumblebees. Yes, it is the sound of chainsaws. Yes, it is. You're absolutely correct, William. And we're kind of letting this happen without massive civil mobilization. And this is going to be a huge problem going forward. Have you been there recently, William?
Yes, I have.
Wow. And what are the locals thinking? Do they understand the consequences of what's happening, or not really?
I don't really think they do. They're more interested in carving out little plots of land in the lateritic soils to raise crops for a few years. The soils have absolutely no mineral content to sustain agriculture. And when they're finished with the crops, rainfall, which is heavy, begins to erode those soils. And it's a real mess.
It is. It is.
You know, for me, the Amazon rainforest should be an international zone.
Yeah.
Sort of like Antarctica, where it's owned by the people of the earth. The entire planet owns it. It shouldn't be a national territory subject to destruction. It hurts all.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the big issue is that we're in an election campaign now for the second round of presidential elections there, and there's a pretty good chance that Bolsonaro, who doesn't want any international interference there, will win, and he will continue deforestation because he doesn't care. So the question is there any way to mitigate that on the ground and to compensate for the deforestation? It's a huge issue. So again, the green zone is 100% virtual. It's going to run from the 10th to the 11th, which is on a weekend, and we're going to keep it open for 48 hours so that everyone from all time zones can connect. It's going to be a virtual space where you'll be able to, as a matter of fact, I'm going to try and show you. It's going to be using a system called Bramble. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so in essence, you're in a virtual space where it's your picture and your microphone, and you can move around in different rooms, just like you would at a normal convention center. So we're looking at organizing this into several areas. And again, I'm reaching out to the wider academic community and the community of interest around on the ground NGOs that can come and present what they're doing and potentially share lessons learned so that other geographies can benefit. Any other questions, comments? You asked if I'm affiliated with RWSN in Singalan. No. What are they? They're the Rhine Institute.
The Rural Water Supply Network is a worldwide network of government officials, volunteers, water supply companies that are bringing water to rural parts of the world.
Okay.
They are integrated through conferences, newsletters, improvements in delivery in one country are shared worldwide. They're an excellent organization that was developed out of the Water and Sanitation for Health programs of many international development organizations.
Excellent. So if you can maybe introduce me to somebody there, if you know someone that I can contact and present our initiative, that'd be wonderful. All right. Now we have a question from Charles, who's asking, can I speak to the need for greater density of hydrologic and other data, spatially, temporally, to define the problems and document benefits, improvements from implementing nature-based solutions? Unfortunately, I can't speak to that in detail, but you're 100% correct that that's the next step. Let
me interject.
Yes, please.
Interject an answer to that question.
Please.
The Rural Water Supply Network, one of their objectives is the development of data.
Okay.
And to the question of the participant, I think too, if they would contact the Rural Water Supply Network, they can be placed in contact with people who have huge databases of information.
Wonderful. So that's really interesting.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. You can contact me at wturner@waterbank.com, and I'll provide you with the contact information.
Wonderful.
The RWSN program.
Okay, great. CT, do you have William's contact information?
I do not. I didn't catch it real quick, but I'm sure I can get it through the group. But thank you.
Is that it, William? Christine wrote it in the chat. wturner@waterbank.com. Is that it?
Correct.
All right. Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Thanks. So Kristen, you're working on environmental attitudes with a special focus on water at Eastern New Mexico. Can you tell us a bit about that? Are you working with on-the-ground organizations that are trying to mitigate water stress, which is probably not going away? I'm interested to hear what folks in the Southwest are working on.
I have actually, I did a survey of our county to get a kind of initial handle on attitudes toward the environment. It's been the climate here, I guess, the political climate, it's been really hard for me to actually get contact to people on the ground. And we are in an area that has a lot of industrial agriculture in the form of dairy and no surface water. But yeah, it's been really hard to try and connect on the ground to people here. It's been my experience. John is here as well. Maybe he has something to say there.
Oh yeah, you're also.
Where are you?
Yeah, this is John Montgomery. We're on the eastern side of New Mexico on the Ogallala Aquifer. In the
Dallas,
aquifer,
Clovis.
yes.
Yes, yes. We're about 20, I'd put it around 20 miles south of Clovis. Yes. And we are in an area that has no surface water. So everything that is used is done through mining water from the Ogallala Aquifer. So we've been in a critical state for quite some time.
There's
What's
quite a lot of data on the Portales Clovis area about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The depth of the water in the Ogallala in Portales is about 75 feet. It's dropping steadily every year. I don't know what it is today. That information is available from the U.S. Geological Survey. If you contact the water data is being assembled through New Mexico Tech in Socorro.
Yes, yes, they've done.
The state engineer has a website which gives you the depth of water, for example, in all the wells. We have on our computers every well in the state of New Mexico. And we can click on each well and get depth of water, well completion details, historical information.
Yes, yes, you are correct. Yeah.
What I find fascinating is that everyone knew that the situation was going to be dire pretty much now, and nothing was done. And we keep welcoming more development and more people flocking to, in essence, a desert. And this is all through the Southwest and the West. And I'm reading, I'm sure you're reading them as well, these very bizarre letters to the editor, to the local papers. I have alerts to surface them, where in essence, people are saying very matter-of-factly, oh, we'll just get the water from the Great Lakes and build some sort of engineering contraption, which A, no one's going to finance, B, what about the Great Lakes? It seems to me we're in a situation of extreme denial on this front, and I just don't understand what the tipping point is going to be for people to realize. So yes, the Lake Mead photos have got people perplexed, but that doesn't mean that they're moving east. What is it going to take?
That is exactly what I would really like to know. I mean, there has been a project that's been in the works for ages here to bring a pipeline down from a reservoir located north of us, and they have secured some funding to work some more on that pipeline. And I guess that's kind of the idea, that somehow this pipeline is going to save us. But and while I do think there are technological solutions, there's going to have to be an application of technology. The belief that somehow, somewhere, a technological solution will save us, therefore we don't have to worry about things today, is perplexing to me. Yes.
We agree. William, sorry we cut you off. You were going to say something.
Well, a number of things. I have a letter written by a concerned citizen in 1946 to a professor of geology at the University of New Mexico, foretelling the situation that we are in today.
Yep.
So this is not a new issue.
Nope.
Years ago, we built the first groundwater computing model in probably the world for the aquifer beneath Tucson, Arizona, and the Tucson Water Department. And we ran a number of scenarios. In the Albuquerque area, the Middle Rio Grande Valley, We see the same type of geology, mountain front recharge, discharge into a main stream in the central part of the basin of the groundwater system. And I approached the City of Albuquerque Engineering Department to sell them on the idea of modeling the Albuquerque aquifer. And they assured me they were sitting on Lake Superior worth of water, and that all they needed was more reservoirs, storage tanks, pipelines, wells, and so forth. It took 30 years or 40 years before they finally realized that I had been right in the early 70s. And we now have a very good water infrastructure plan here in Albuquerque, but the ignorance and the willingness of people to maintain, I guess it's the inertia behind people who are in comfortable jobs, people who study. There's a lack of action, the lack of panic. I think we've reached and we passed the tipping point. There is no return to the world we knew. Our glaciers are disappearing. The Greenland ice cap will melt. Sea levels will rise 10 or 15 feet. They'll flood every coastal area in the world. The highest point in Florida is 120 feet above sea levels. They will submerge Pacific islands. That's a fact. That's happening now. So anything that's done henceforth is trying to play catch up. And I don't believe the resources exist to meet those problems. At the present time, we have massive problems along the Colorado River system. Under the Colorado River Compact, states are allocated a certain amount of water. California, for decades, has been exceeding their permitted amount. You have a number of different users, agriculture, industry, municipalities vying for the same water. And as we started this conversation, I had the privilege of talking with Ms. Tang about application of operations research methods to determine how all of these interest groups can come together to reduce costs, reduce water demand, and the use of operations research to try to solve the problem of whose ox should get gored, because that's what's going to have to happen. We need curtailments. In England, when you exchange a water right, there is a transfer from one point to another. The Environment Agency issues permits for that, but they also charge the parties a 10%, I call it a tithe. They reserve 10% of the water being transferred for the environment to ensure a sustainable water supply for the environment and to put back into balance the demand versus the supply.
What's interesting is that this summer, California, specifically Los Angeles, was under extreme water stress, and they found a way to force people to conserve, and they did. So there are ways to force conservation. They're just not being applied enough. So the key question is, how do you make it painless or near painless to just be a good water steward, a good water citizen? This is something that I'm really extremely interested in, and I'm looking for organizations that do that, because they're bound to come and maybe present at the virtual green zone. So again, this is a wide call that I'll follow up with an email to the mailing list, Christine, to get people to dig into their Rolodex and find folks who are doing on the ground initiatives that can be replicated. That's really what I'm looking for. Any other comments, questions, tangents that we want to cover, since we're all sort of like-minded on all these water issues?
So I have a question
Sure.
for you. What are your key takeaways of your work in water geopolitics so far?
So far, it's a near absent category in either politics itself at the global level, or even at the national level. I think pretty much every country is in a deep denial of the underpinnings of all water systems and how we must collaborate across borders, which is what you guys work on, to alleviate hardship when there's still time. And that's true in the Middle East. That's true in Europe increasingly. Just this summer, we've had situations in France where there were times where the ground was really extremely dry, and that led to fires. And in the southwest, south of Valdo, there was a mini reservoir for the local fire station that was raided by the local operator of a motorcycle track, because he needed to water his track. And that person, of course, got caught and was asked, "Do you understand what you're doing?" And he says, "Well, it's there." So people have no inkling as to just how precious the resource is, and they just feel that you turn a faucet and it works. So that's my takeaway. My takeaway is extreme denial across geographies, and there needs to be a very special attention, and that's what I want to make sure we cover with our green zone, is to make sure it is covered in the COP15 negotiations, because biodiversity as a whole needs to have water at the center. There is no life, animal or human, without water and access to it. That's my takeaway.
I'd like to make a comment on geopolitical
Please.
aspect. I wouldn't say it's denial. Certainly, there's some of that exists, but it is largely ignorance on the part of the public and on the part of the politicians. I listen in regularly to legislative committee hearings on water issues, and I am astounded at the ignorance of our legislators on water law, physics of water, the engineering aspects, the water supply, total ignorance. There are sometimes a few politicians who do understand the issues. But one of the problems that we have is elections every 2 or 4 years.
Yep.
So where a person is coming up to speed on the water issue, it's voted out of office or retires.
Yep.
And that wisdom leaves us. We've had several of those people in New Mexico who have retired. And two that immediately come to mind are G.X. McSherry and Joe Stell. These guys have been legislators for decades, and they were really experts in the water horizon. But most politicians have a short political life.
They do.
And
You're
they're not
absolutely correct.
focusing, and they're not having the right educational background. I don't know how you correct that, but that I think it's just a fact of life.
Very much agree with you, William. I agree wholeheartedly with the lack of long-term thinking. And you were talking about the Colorado Water Compact. It just came out recently that there was a potential error in the calculation in the 20s, so 100 years ago, which led us to an overtaxing of the river itself, which is leading to the situation we have now. So there absolutely needs to be, going back to Charles's point, more focus on data so that we know what we're dealing with.
The background of water law in the West is the Spanish colonial water law system.
Interesting.
That was imported into the colonies, the Spanish colonies, and a landowner didn't get water unless it was specifically granted to him in writing by a royal grant.
Wow.
Prior to the issuance of a royal grant, the King of Spain had an officer throughout, many officers, throughout the colonies who would review each of these applications to determine whether or not the issue of the grant for water would adversely impact a prior grantee. Originally, the Spanish system was a riparian rights system, which doesn't work well in an arid climate. But the examination of the effect of a new applicant on an older user was the birth of the doctrine of prior appropriations, which we follow in the 18 Western states. That principle, if it is applied properly, should limit or create the balance between supply and demand.
Yeah.
What has happened is that with development, people began drilling water wells without realizing that the water wells are draining water that would otherwise flow into a river.
Right.
Contribute to surface water flow. And that impact on the river is delayed based upon the distance from the river of the well, the hydraulic characteristics of the aquifer, the transmissivity and the storage coefficient of the aquifer. Sometimes the influence can be almost immediate. Sometimes it may take 20 years, but it finally catches up with you, and it does impact the surface water flow, which is used by many users, different users, and has created these deficits that we're seeing among one cause, certainly the climate, and the weather patterns are another cause. I've seen some climatological studies recently, as recently as this week, which is saying that the La Nina event is probably going to extend into March or early next year.
Mm-hmm.
It generally means a diminished surface water and snowpack. Anyway, just saying.
No, that's really interesting. I see that Reza is with us, and we met Reza last time I was in one of the TGR sessions. Could you speak to what I alluded to in my presentation, which is the extreme water stress in Iran? Is that something you're able to speak to?
Thank you so much. Thanks for your presentation. To be honest, right now, I have no detailed information about the water situation in Iran, but I know that some research institutes and universities are working hard to study the policies that applied before and decide for the future. It's I can say it's hard situation for Iran.
Yes,
this is one of the biggest crises.
that's right. That's right. And it gets very little coverage in what's happening in the country. But going back to William's point, it has to do with ignorance at all levels, including the media, that somehow doesn't think it's a worthwhile issue to explore when it's at the root of a host of potential conflicts in the area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just, you are right. The media coverage is weak for this problem, and just some universities and some researchers, or maybe some policymakers engage with the issue really.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Speaking to other countries in the Middle East, Damascus, Syria's main water supply are the Figes Springs that have been converted to municipal water supply. At one time, the largest spring in the world, the south coast of Turkey, Dumanli Springs. In Iran, there's a huge spring in a place called Tsar Cheshmeh. These large springs are the thermometer by which you can determine the general conditions throughout a region, because the springs have recent recharge, they yield to discharge.
Right.
And those discharge curves for those springs can be calculated. They're double porosity, what we call double porosity systems. And by measuring the flow of those springs over a period of years, you can easily detect in a heartbeat whether you've got a shortage or a surfeit of supply. And those springs provide the water supply for many, many villages throughout the Middle East. I've worked on 60 of those springs in the country of Cyprus. I am sitting on my floor here, a stack of green bar paper, where I can go in and look at the discharge at any point in time, and I can tell you what the discharge will be in 6 months.
Wow.
Which tells me what water supply shortages I may have, not only for the village, but for businesses in the village, and more importantly, for the livestock in those villages.
So going back to Charles's point on data, who gets to see this data, William? How are you sharing it? Is there a way that it's available to governments?
That data does exist. You raise a very important point. Years ago, when I worked for the Water Development Department in Cyprus, I knew where all the data was. Some years later, maybe the late 70s, I saw that an American company by the name of Aerospace had a contract to do hydrologic modeling, and they needed data. Well, Aerospace ultimately withdrew from the contract because no one could find any data.
Oh, God.
And I saw an aerospace guy at an international conference, and I said, well, that data is in room such and such, and it's in a drawer in a filing case. I did a project in Indonesia where, for the US government, where the city of Surakarta
Yeah.
was facing water shortages, and the U.S. government had hired an American hydrologist who lived in the Philippines to determine what data was there on groundwater, because they wanted to use wells. Well, this Filipino-American hydrologist went down to Surakarta. He was there for 6 months, and he issued a report. And he said, there's no groundwater. Well, the fellow in Washington thought that was highly unlikely. He sent me out there. And when I walked into the office of the Hydrological Service, the first question I asked of my counterpart, Indonesian counterpart, Suyatno Yuwono, well, I said, Suyatno, do you have any information on the geology and wells in the area? And he sat down at his desk and he pulled out a drawer. And he had data on every well that had been drilled for the city water supply since the Dutch colonial days in 1890. I said, well, here it is. My job is done. Plenty of groundwater. Why didn't the prior American fellow see this data? And Suyatno said to me, he never asked for it.
Oh God. So we go back
He
to
never asked.
yeah, we go back to the problem we identified. Wow. So we're coming to the end here. Is there any final comment, question that everybody wants to share, ask in the chat, or unmute yourself?
Well, I'll just put it in 2 cents. I've been in this space for more than 50 years.
Yep.
I started as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1962. And I've seen just about everything, and I'm very discouraged that young folk today are talking about the same problems that I was working on 50 years ago.
Sure.
So there hasn't been a lot learned in the last 50 years. And every generation seems to have to relearn these lessons. But I believe we need more action rather than more talk. For example, back in 1987, I proposed using technology developed by the ancient Nabateans in the Negev desert of Israel to impound and save every drop of water that fell on the desert by the creation of small little coffer dams up and down the topography in the arroyos. They caught it all in an infiltrator.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen the same technology used by the ancient Greeks in the island of Cyprus, where they do the same thing, little dams maybe 6 inches high, going down a hillside. I proposed in '87 that we build those kinds of impoundment structures along our Tejeras Arroyo. You build them with a bulldozer, they're very cheap and easy to build. They get washed out and go put them up again. But what it does is it retards the flow of the water down the arroyo so that it infiltrates. That project, a project of that type, was implemented years ago in Morocco, and they started with the Wadi Sus project.
Got it.
They started at the mountain front, and they built these little impoundments with a bulldozer all the way down to the sea.
Yeah.
And they kept that water from flowing in a mad rush down to the sea and allowed it to recharge. That's something that doesn't take a lot of study. It takes implementation.
Exactly. And it takes emulation. That's what I'm trying to do, is to show that it's done. I'm really interested, and you may be able to direct me to folks on the ground there, in what Bermuda does. So Bermuda recycles every single drop of rainwater because
Oh,
they don't
yeah.
have, because they don't have plentiful access. So every single building, every single house in Bermuda recycles rainwater. So we
And
need to
they
see
have
these examples.
large areas covered with asphalt sloping, and they collect every bit of
Yeah.
rainfall on the land surface over that. I've seen those in the Turks and Caicos.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was asked on a project in El Salvador, how should we get water? I said, well, we can use the techniques that were used in ancient Iraq and
Yep.
Iran thousands of years ago, which is the chain of wells.
That's right.
You put down wells like pearls on a necklace and connect them with underground tunnels so you can skim the water off the water table. They work.
They do. They do. They
It's
do.
not high
You're right.
tech. Engineers
It's
don't
not.
like them.
No, but it
They
works.
sent them. Yeah.
It works. It works.
I've done similar
We're
projects
almost
in
out of
Honduras.
time. We're almost out of time, William. You and I are going to talk offline because there's a lot that I can learn from you. I want to thank Christine, Jeanette, and the Boundary Groundwater Resilience Project for the opportunity to speak to all of you today. And if you have sort of a parting message, Christine, that you want to share, please.
No, I just want to thank you, but you thanked us first, and I feel bad for that. But thank you so much for presenting and facilitating this conversation.
Glad to. Glad to meet all of you, and we're gonna follow up with an email to all of you, but to also the wider list to see who we can connect with so that they can come if they're interested to present in December.
Yes, thank you.